Hi everyone, and welcome to StudioJake. I, of course, am your host, Jacob Airy. Thank you for joining me today. So, my last video, I talked about how realism ruins superheroes, and I defined realism because I didn't want there to be any confusion, and I'm going to do that again for this video. So, forgive me for looking down and looking at my phone, but I don't have any of the fancy stuff that other YouTubers have, so I'm just going to read it real quick. The attitude or practice of accepting a situation as it is and being prepared to deal with it accordingly. No worries there. The quality of representing a person, thing, or situation accurately or in a way that is true to life. So, nothing wrong with that, obviously. There's nothing wrong with having some sort of realism in the arts, right? I mean, we don't want to go off into the uncanny valley. And I talked about how in superheroes, though, sort of this extreme drive to make everything realistic kind of takes qualities out of fiction, particularly when it comes to superheroes. And I use the examples of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. I talked about the Punisher, Batman, and even Sir Gawain from the story of Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, about how it removes sort of the whimsy and fantastical and even aspirational ideals from these characters. And so that's kind of a rehash of it. You can go watch for all my points and back on my channel. I'll post a link up there in one of those little comment things that appears so you can see it. And just to go deeper into this, I want to talk about how realism can ruin villains. And you can kind of see how that is going just based on watching sort of the Disney Channel go down. But we're going to start out with something a little bit more basic. So everyone knows that Oroku Saki is the secret identity, or maybe not so secret identity, of the Shredder. He's the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles' arch nemesis. He's really powerful ninja. He wears this outfit that's got blades on it, which is why he becomes the Shredder, and he leads his ninjas with impunity and whatnot. He's always on a mission to kill those turtles. And, there have been other iterations of the Shredder, but just talking about the main one, Oroku Saki, I always really liked his character as a villain. Now, of course, if you watch the 2003 Turtles, Oroku Saki wasn't actually a person. He was actually an alien, and then at one point, I think he was a demon, or a man possessed by a demon, and then, that was some of the past, and then at one point, he was like a digital program. But, I'm talking about specifically the sort of the main Oroku Saki that we know, the one from the movies or the 80s cartoon or from the video games and the comics. And which, by the way, the 2003 Turtles is my favorite show, so I'm not throwing any shade. I'm just saying for this video's sake. And whenever they wanted to bring him to the Michael Bay produced Ninja Turtle films, originally they cast a Caucasian to play the Shredder, and the fans were rightly outraged. Oroku Saki is Japanese, he should be Japanese, and he should be portrayed by a Japanese actor. And of course, they recut the film, I believe, where the Caucasian character was just Oroku Saki's minion. He actually worked for the Shredder. He wasn't the Shredder. So I'm glad that worked out. But one of the things that I find that again, and I used this, and I talked about this with the original idea behind the Michael Bay produced films, was, the turtles, they were originally going to be aliens. They weren't going to be turtles exposed to goo or ooze from TCRI. They actually were going to be aliens. And so I feel like there was a little bit of that hyperrealism leaking into the case with the Shredder, because, the story takes place in New York. The turtles are very New York based. And so they were thinking, okay, well, there's not, we're going to make the character Caucasian. For one thing, I think there was a little bit of early wokeness in there, because they're like, oh, we can't have a villain, the supremely evil villain, and make him a person of a minority community. We're going to have to make him Caucasian, and also it's New York based. And I feel like I'm glad that they adjust course corrected. Like I said, Hiroko Saki is a Japanese character. He should be portrayed by a Japanese actor. And I really think that this sort of hyperrealism affects other villains. So, in one respect, I mentioned the Disney films. So if you look at the arc of the Disney films, the villains were just pure evil. And there was no place for sympathy for them or empathy for them. You just knew that they were the bad guys, right? You cheered when they got defeated, and so on and so forth. You just sort of got the gist. I remember as a kid, Maleficent, who Disney later totally ruined in the live action version with Angelina Jolie, which I'll talk about here in a minute. But when I first saw Sleeping Beauty and Maleficent walks into the scene, I knew right away she was the bad guy. I didn't need to know her past. I didn't need to know, oh, her daddy was mean to her once, or someone stole her wings. I didn't need to know all that. I just needed to know that this was the person that Aurora and Prince Philip are going to have to defeat for their love story to endure. Now, and then when Disney did the live action remake, right, they gave her this sort of backstory where she's so sympathetic because she was betrayed by her one true love and he stole her wings, which was an allegory for her being assaulted by him, right? And then he has them on display, and he gets worse and worse as the movie goes on, and she becomes better and better, right? And I was confused by this because, for one thing, Maleficent's name literally means pure evil, or is at least a synonym for that. So, they should have, if they wanted to make a more sympathetic villain, they should have picked someone differently. Her name literally means pure evil. I don't know what to tell you. And so I think that sort of hyperrealism, that all villains have to have context. They all have to have some sort of tragic backstory. And this drives me crazy because I'm even seeing this leak into true crime documentaries where they're going to talk about, this serial killer who murdered people and raped them and threw them into their backyards and buried them. Oh my gosh, when they were little, their dad was mean to them. We see this happening with Eileen Warhawes, right? She's one of the most prolific female serial killers. There's actually feminists who cheer her on. So she was a prostitute who would lure men, murder them, and then rob them. And I'm not saying these men were great. Some of them probably were really terrible men, but that didn't mean they deserved to be killed at the hands of this psychopath. And now, her attorneys tried to do this whole thing where it was, her past, her past corrupted. A lot of people have corrupted past. They have abusive past, but they don't become like Eileen. Eileen was a psychopath. Everything else said about her doesn't matter. Once you start murdering people, it doesn't really matter what your past was. And so, we're seeing, and I was even watching one about the Yorkshire Ripper, and it was like, okay, so the Yorkshire Ripper was a misogynist. He clearly was, killing women with a jackhammer. That's clearly, and things he said to the press later, clearly misogynist. And they're like trying to blame his dad for his upbringing, and how his dad, which they claim that his dad brought him up in this sort of traditional where men have to do this and women have to do this. It's like, who cares? Like, okay, so what? His dad was a jerk, and that doesn't mean that the Yorkshire Ripper shouldn't have been a murderer, or should have been a murderer, I should say. It just meant that he, that maybe this sort of informed his ideals, and as corrupt as those are, but, it's still, I watch these true crime documentaries and I'm like, who cares? Like, this guy was a murderer. I don't need the context of, daddy said some things to him that were, incorrect or whatever. And so that, hyperized it. No, he would have, I personally think once these people become killers, there, it doesn't matter what was in their past. Their past is the past. And we're seeing this creep in. Like, if you look at and I'll go back to Disney for a moment. You see this with Mulan, right? So you had Shan Yu. I didn't know Shan Yu's past. I'm talking about the animated Mulan, where Ming Na voiced the character of Mulan. And they had this Hun, who was the main antagonist, and he's invading China, and he's this terrifying villain. And I didn't need to know his backstory. I just knew he was the bad guy. I knew he was driven by strength and rage and narcissism, right? He wants the emperor to bow to him because he's a freaking narcissist. And Mulan sort of uses those qualities as the villain to defeat him. And then if you fast forward to the modern Mulan, the villain, he's not that strong. He's not particularly powerful. Yes, he's a narcissist, and he has sort of this thing where he feels like he's been aggrieved by the emperor of China. And I just think that it's silly. It was, was the mean emperor bad to your tribe? And then they also introduced this sort of sorceress woman who has a lot of chi power because it's super realistic, right? That's what they kept saying. Oh, we're going to make the Mulan remake super realistic, and then they didn't, right? Because they couldn't. And we're also seeing how in Disney movies the villain has disappeared pretty much. It's either the main character's fears or it's hubris. As much as I liked Raya and the Last Dragon, there wasn't really a villain in the story. Like okay, so they had those cloud monster things, but they weren't really like a villain. They were just sort of this more like an idea, and that was consuming the world and turning humanity and the dragons into stone. And I just think that as good as Raya and the Last Dragon was, I think it would have been. I said it was good, but it wasn't great. You look at Sleeping Beauty or Cinderella or Beauty and the Beast. These are great films, and you don't need to. And it's. And I say Beauty and the Beast. There's not really a villain in Beauty and the Beast. You got me there. I'll concede that. But if you look at because that's not really a story about good versus evil. That's a love story. But Lion King, right? Simba has an antagonist in his uncle Scar who wants to take the throne from him, and I feel that with they're wanting to put these qualities in the villains in say like in Marvel films or in their shows, or same with the Star Wars stuff that's coming out. They somehow want to make the bad guys sympathetic, and I think that's a mistake. Now there's nothing wrong with a little undercurrent of sympathy, but it's like they want to drown you in it, because I think they've forgotten the difference between sympathy and empathy. So sympathy is where you feel bad for a person and you want to help them and try to make the situation better for them. Empathy is where you can relate sort of to the person and you see them on a human level. And Joker is a really good example of this. I'm actually not a fan of solo villain movies. I personally think they're dumb, but Joker is an exception. I really liked Joker. I thought Joker was really well acted. And it's a good example of a film that produces empathy but not sympathy. So you kind of empathize with what is happening with the Joker as he's going through all of this, as he's coming to it, and then all of a sudden you realize, oh my gosh, this guy's a bad guy and there's no going back for him. And even with other movies where, Loki is a good example, right? So Loki starts off from sort of like a genocidal villain, right? In the first Thor, he's trying to wipe out the frost giants. In the first Avengers movie, he's trying to wipe out New York, right? And then they want you to feel bad for him in the first couple episodes of his show. Now, there's nothing wrong with a redemption story, even for someone who is sort of that evil. I mean, we see this with Dragon Ball Z, right? Dragon Ball Z, Vegeta is this really powerful Saiyan. He's from an alien race, and he's a genocidal maniac. I mean, the episode where you kind of first see him at full power is he destroys a planet of basically of an enslaved population. And but they bring this all the way around till the last bit of the show when he goes from villain to hero and sort of redeems himself. And also they give, again, they give sort of these character arc developments that make you go, okay, I can see Vegeta becoming a hero. I can see why. Same with Piccolo from Dragon Ball Z, or think about Obito from Naruto, right? Obito, he witnesses the girl that he loves being killed by his best friend, and this damages his psyche, and he ends up becoming the villain Toby. And it's sorry, spoiler alert for those of you who haven't seen Naruto, but trust me, the show is way more involved in that. And you empathize with him, and you might feel sympathy for those undercurrents about him, but you realize this is the bad guy, and I don't need a 5-point presentation, particularly in regards to film, on why the villain is bad. I'm fine. What's the old saying? Show, don't tell. But they just, the shows want to throw this hyper-realistic exposition and monologuing and incessant flashbacks to the point where you just don't care anymore. And I really feel like whereas whimsy, fantasy, and being aspiring is, to me, what makes a good hero in fiction. For me, what makes a good villain is one that you can empathize with, one that's pure evil, but also one that's not cartoonish. And that's kind of the problem with sort of in my opinion, with modern films, is they're making the villains too cartoonish. They're either so evil that you don't even really understand why they're evil, or it's like, oh my gosh, yes, oh yeah, mommy said a bad word to you once, and so now you're a super villain. Oh, your date didn't want to go to the prom with you. What's with prom too? I mean, in all these new shows that are coming out, prom. Listen, okay, I was homeschooled, but we still had a prom. I didn't go. I thought it was dumb. Who cares? And it's so funny. I even remember when this stuff was coming out. Why is prom such a big deal? Netflix. Prom, prom is in She-Ra, the Princess of Power. Prom is in the movie Prom. It's dumb, ridiculous, and silly and cartoonish, which is again what these villains are becoming. I think about WandaVision, how the director of Sword, he's sort of the straight-laced secret agent type guy, and all of a sudden he's the bad guy for no reason. It's very cartoonish. So so that's what I would say is a villain that you can empathize with on a human level, a villain that that right away is evil. And I guess one is that they're not cartoonish, that they have sort of a way that you can sympathize with their undercurrents, but right away that this is the bad guy. They don't need exaggerated plots. They don't need hours and hours of exposition and flashbacks and whatnot. So hopefully we'll see fiction return to sort of this where realism is dealt out in small doses, instead of sort of this hyper-realism that has taken over comic books and novels and television and movies. I really hope we get back to that. But and again, I know this one, part 2, this one probably sounds like I'm rambling as well, and maybe I am a little bit, but sometimes rambling is good. And I really want to see a return to these villains that I used to admire in my kid, teen, and early adult years. I'm ready to see some bad guys who are truly evil. If you enjoyed that video, be sure to hit the like button, leave me a comment below, share this video out, and I would really appreciate it if you chose today to become a subscriber to StudioJake. Thank you so much for watching. You can follow me on all my socials that are in the description of this video, and I'll see you next time right here on StudioJake.